My name is Alara, and if I could go back to when I was 9, I'd tell that little girl two things. 1. You're not crazy. 2. You're not the mistake they said you were. But back then, I didn't know either of those things. All I knew was the quiet geography of absence. I knew the weight of a silence that followed my name and the chill of a room that warmed when I left it. Dinner always looked different on my plate than on anyone else's. My sister, Celeste, the designated miracle, would find her plate a landscape of care. A tender piece of salmon, glistening with lemon dill butter, a mound of quinoa speckled with vibrant herbs, roasted asparagus spears arranged in a perfect fan. My portion was an afterthought, a pale echo. A boiled potato, perhaps, or a slice of plain bread. When I once gathered the courage to ask my mother why, her eyes, the color of a winter sky, didn't quite meet mine. Celeste is delicate, Alara. She needs nurturing. You have a stronger constitution. A stronger constitution. It sounded like an affliction, like being born with an extra, unwanted limb. For years, I tried to believe it was a form of backhanded love, a testament to my resilience. I tried to believe I wasn't imagining the fault line that ran through our family, with Celeste and my parents on one side, and me on the other, standing in the growing chasm. Then came the night the earth beneath my feet didn't just crack, it shattered. I was 13. I'd been at the public library, a sanctuary of paper and quiet reverence where the air didn't press down on my shoulders. I lost track of time among the shelves, tracing the spines of books that promised other worlds. When I finally walked home, the evening fog of Port Blossom was rolling in from the harbor, wrapping the familiar houses in a soft, gray shroud. I stepped inside our old Victorian on Sycamore Lane, and the smell of roasted chicken rich with rosemary and garlic was so immediate, so welcoming, it felt like a betrayal. My stomach clenched with a hope I should have known better than to entertain. In the dining room, the scene was already set like a tableau. Celeste was seated at the head of the table, a position usually reserved for my father. Before her was a golden brown chicken leg, steam rising from its crispy skin, surrounded by saffron rice and glazed carrots. I moved into the kitchen, a ghost in my own home. My plate was on the counter, as always. A single, dry chicken wing. Next to it, a small scoop of plain, white rice. That was all. Where's the rest? The words left my mouth before I could stop them, thin and brittle in the heavy silence. I was so tired of pretending, so weary of arranging my face into a mask of acceptance. My father, Richard Thorne, was standing by the sink, polishing a wine glass with a linen cloth. He was a man who built his life on the appearance of impeccable control. As a financial advisor, he managed the futures of Port Blossom's elite, and he managed his home with the same cold, calculating precision. He didn't like his authority questioned. He turned slowly, placing the glass on the counter with a deliberate click. Are you asking me a question with that tone, Alara? I felt my throat tighten, but the small, defiant spark I'd been nursing for years refused to be extinguished. It's not fair, I whispered, my voice trembling. Why does she get everything? From the dining room, Celeste's light, tinkling laugh drifted in. Maybe because I don't sulk in corners like a sad little ghost, Alara. My mother, who was arranging flowers in a vase, didn't look up. But my father's face, which had been a mask of cold displeasure, suddenly went blank. It was a terrifying transformation, the calm before a storm I had never seen but had always felt brewing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a threat. He simply walked toward me, his steps measured and silent on the worn linoleum. He took my right hand. His grip was surprisingly gentle at first. Then, with a swift, economical movement, he pressed it flat against the granite countertop. With his other hand, he picked up the heavy crystal paperweight from the small desk in the corner of the kitchen, a prism of cut glass he'd received for being Man of the Year at the local Chamber of Commerce. Celeste was still humming to herself in the other room. My mother was still trimming a rose stem. Time seemed to slow, to thicken like honey. Then a sound. A dull, sickening crack that vibrated up my arm. I think I floated out of my body for a second. I saw a girl with wide, terrified eyes standing in a brightly lit kitchen. I heard a scream, thin and sharp, and realized it was my own. Another crack, closer to the knuckles. The pain was a white-hot flash, blinding and absolute. My fingers were bending in ways they were never meant to. A deep, ugly purple began to bloom beneath the skin, a storm cloud of trauma. My father leaned in, his breath cool against my cheek. His voice was a low whisper, a secret just for me. "Ask me again. I dare you." He set the crystal paperweight back on the desk, not a single flicker of emotion on his face. Then he turned and walked into the dining room as if nothing had happened. I slid to the floor, cradling my shattered hand. Through the doorway, I could see Celeste taking a delicate bite of her chicken. There was no hospital. No apology. No one was punished. That night, my mother led me to the attic, her touch as cold and impersonal as a nurse's. She gave me a bag of frozen peas and an old dish towel. "You need to learn not to provoke your father," she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. She closed the attic door, and I heard the bolt slide shut. I spent the night on a dusty cot, my fingers throbbing, a chorus of agony. I wrapped them in the towel, the mangled shape a grotesque parody of a hand. I shivered, but not from the cold. I was shaking with a fury so pure and so potent it felt like it was forging me into something new, something hard and sharp. That was the night I stopped being a child. My fingers healed, but they healed wrong. No doctor ever set them. To this day, the knuckles on my right hand are a landscape of small, sharp hills. They don't bend quite right. And when the air is damp with port blossoms fog, they ache with the memory of that night. Celeste, when she bothered to notice, would sometimes say it was a lesson in toughness. "Father knows how to build character," she'd parrot, her words a perfect reflection of his own hollow philosophy. But they didn't understand. Pain like that doesn't just build character, it rewires your soul. It turns every scar into a blueprint for survival. They thought they had broken me, that the shattered pieces of the girl I was would be swept away and forgotten. They were wrong. I didn't disappear. I became invisible. I learned to move through the house like a whisper of air, to listen from the shadows, to watch and to wait. And that was their most critical mistake. Because in their world of loud proclamations and grand gestures, they had forgotten the power of the quiet observer. My father's life was a carefully constructed facade. He left for late-night client meetings, but I knew he was meeting with a councilman in a dimly lit bar by the docks, exchanging envelopes that felt heavier than paper. My mother, the esteemed chair of the Port Blossom Historical Society, had a habit of reallocating donation funds for what she called hosting essentials, which looked a lot like new shoes and trips to the spa. Celeste, their precious star, was building an online following as a wellness and authenticity influencer, while her private messages were a stream of vicious gossip and cruelty. They were a family built on a foundation of beautiful lies. I, the girl they tried to erase, was the only one who saw the truth. And shadows learn exactly where the light switches are. By the time I was 16, I had read most of the books in the Port Blossom Library. My crooked fingers, while clumsy with some tasks, found a strange grace on a keyboard. I wrote stories in secret, pouring all the things I couldn't say onto the blank page. My escape from the house on Sycamore Lane wasn't a place, but an activity. I started volunteering at the Verdant Heart Community Garden, a sprawling oasis of green on the edge of town. That's where I met Agnes. Agnes was in her late 60s, with hands stained by earth and eyes that held the patient wisdom of someone who understood the slow, stubborn nature of growth. She managed the garden not like a general, but like a tender guardian, coaxing life from the soil with a quiet, steady presence. One sunny afternoon, she saw me struggling to tie a tomato vine to a stake, my right hand refusing to cooperate. My fingers trembled with frustration. "Let me help you with that, dear," she said, her voice warm as sun-drenched soil. She gently took the twine from me, her own nimble fingers making a perfect knot. She glanced at my hand, at the unnatural angles of my knuckles. "An old injury?" she asked, her tone soft and devoid of pity. I opened my mouth, the practiced lie I fell, ready on my tongue. But looking into her clear, kind eyes, I couldn't say it. I just shrugged. "A family heirloom," I mumbled, the bitterness sharp in my throat. She didn't press. But a few weeks later, as we were packing up for the day, She handed me a worn canvas tote bag. "A few books I thought you might like," she said. Inside, nestled between a volume of Mary Oliver's poetry and a guide to container gardening, was a crisp manila folder. The tab read, "Resources for a New Start." Inside, I found paperwork for legal emancipation, contact information for youth housing programs, and the number for a pro bono lawyer who specialized in juvenile cases. "You didn't ask," Agnes said, her gaze steady and unwavering. "But I see more than just the weeds in this garden, Alara." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sharp, but I willed them back. Crying felt like a luxury I hadn't yet earned. I folded the papers carefully and tucked them into my backpack. It wasn't time yet, but it would be soon. My revenge wouldn't be a sudden, violent storm like my father's. It would be a slow, patient bloom, nurtured in secret, until it was ready to reshape the entire landscape. I remained in that house for 2 more years, a ghost haunting the hallways, a silent archivist of their hypocrisy. After the night with the paperweight, my relationship with pain had changed. It was no longer just a source of fear. It was a whetstone, sharpening my focus, honing my resolve. Every ache in my mangled fingers was a reminder of my purpose. I was planning, every moment of every day, a quiet and meticulous deconstruction. It began with observation. Agnes's gift wasn't just the folder, it was the quiet confidence she had in me. At the garden, I learned about root systems, about how the health of a plant depends entirely on what's happening unseen, beneath the surface. I started applying that lesson to my family. My father, Richard Thorne, preached financial prudence and long-term security to his clients. He was a pillar of the Port Blossom business community, his photo in the local paper whenever he sponsored a charity golf tournament. But I saw the other side. I started noticing the small discrepancies in the mail, the letters from unfamiliar lenders, the second, private post office box key he kept hidden in his sock drawer. One evening, feigning sleep on the living room sofa, I overheard a hushed, frantic phone call. He was talking about leveraging assets and short-term liquidity problems. He wasn't a genius investor. He was a gambler, using his clients' money to cover his own risky bets. My mother, Marion, was just as duplicitous. As the head of the Historical Society, she organized lavish fundraising galas. She spoke passionately about preserving Port Blossom's heritage, about the importance of our shared history. But I saw the receipts she tried to bury, the catering bills that were mysteriously inflated, the antique acquisitions that looked suspiciously like new jewelry for herself. She wasn't preserving history, she was liquidating it for personal gain. And then there was Celeste. Her online brand, Celeste Sanctuary, was a pastel-hued dream of mindful living, vegan recipes, and heartfelt affirmations. She posted tearful videos about the importance of kindness and authenticity. But I had access to her laptop. I saw the drafts of her posts, the calculated way she crafted her image. I read her direct messages, where she and her friends would viciously mock their own followers, sharing screenshots of vulnerable comments and laughing at their fans' struggles. Her sanctuary was a Potemkin village, beautiful on the outside and rotten within. They were building a legacy on a foundation of sand, and I knew a single, well-placed wave could wash it all away. My tool wasn't a hammer or a fist. It was a small, inexpensive digital voice recorder I bought with the money I earned from selling vegetables from my garden plot. It was smaller than my thumb, easily hidden. I started leaving it in the study during my father's late-night calls. I tucked it into a pot of wilting ferns in the living room. I learned their routines, their blind spots. For months, I gathered audio, transferring the files to an encrypted hard drive Agnes had helped me procure. The recordings were a symphony of their true selves. My mother, laughing with a friend on the phone. "Oh, the gala's silent auction fund? Let's just say it's silently funding my new patio furniture. No one ever audits the damn thing." Celeste, on a video call with another influencer. This girl DM'd me saying my post saved her life. It's so cringe. I literally just copied the caption from a Pinterest board. And then, the piece I was waiting for. My father, drunk on expensive whiskey, talking to one of his cronies. His voice was thick with self-pity and rage. "The market's turning on me, and I've still got that liability upstairs. Alara. Useless. An anchor. I should have done more than just her hand that night. Should have broken her jaw, shut her up for good. She's a ghost in my own house, just staring. A constant, silent judgment. A constant, silent judgment. He'd finally seen me. I isolated the audio clip, my hands steady as I saved it to a separate file. The ache in my knuckles was a low, steady hum, a note of grim satisfaction. Graduation day arrived. Celeste, who had scraped by with C's, was gifted a brand new white convertible. Her Instagram post about it, a testament to hard work paying off, got thousands of likes. I, who graduated with honors, received nothing. Not a handshake, not a congratulations. Just the familiar, suffocating silence. It didn't matter. I was already gone. That night, I packed a single duffel bag with my few clothes, my books, the hard drive, and my journals. On the pristine kitchen counter, where my meager meals had always been left, I placed a small, simple note. It read, "You can't starve a root you've already forced to grow in the dark. I'm going to find the sun. Alara." I walked out of the house on Sycamore Lane just after midnight, the fog-laced air tasting of salt and freedom. Agnes was waiting for me at the entrance to the community garden, the headlights of her old Subaru cutting through the mist. She had prepared the small room behind the main potting shed for me. It was tiny, with a cot and a small desk, but the window looked out over rows of sleeping sunflowers. That night, I felt a lightness I hadn't known was possible. But my work wasn't finished. The hard drive wasn't for the police. That felt too clumsy, too loud. My family dealt in whispers and reputations, and so would I. I created an anonymous blog, a serialized narrative I called The House of Glass. I began to publish chapters once a week, telling the story of a prominent family in a small, coastal town. I didn't use their names. I used archetypes: the financier, the curator, the angel. With lyrical, dispassionate prose, I laid their secrets bare. I described the house with its beautiful facade and rotten core, the dinners where one daughter was celebrated and the other erased, the quiet violence that was mistaken for discipline. And woven into the text were embedded audio files. A reader could click a link and hear the curator laughing about her embezzled funds. They could hear the angel's venomous private conversations. And in the climactic 10th chapter, they could hear the financier, drunk and defeated, wishing he had done more to silence his useless daughter. My story wasn't an angry tirade. It was written with a strange, sad beauty. It was a piece of literary fiction that just happened to be true. It found an audience slowly, at first on niche writing forums, then it was shared on social media. Someone from Port Blossom read it and posted on a local Facebook group, "Doesn't this sound familiar?" The question mark hung in the digital air. Within a week, The House of Glass was the town's biggest open secret. The blog went viral locally. My prose was dissected, my descriptions of the foggy streets and the grand old house praised for their authenticity. And the wave I had set in motion finally crashed. An anonymous tip, citing evidence from a popular online story, was sent to the State Financial Regulatory Board. An investigation was launched into Richard Thorne's firm. Clients, spooked, began pulling their investments en masse. The curator's name was brought up at the Historical Society's next board meeting. An emergency audit was called. Celeste's followers began to turn on her, her comment sections flooded with accusations of hypocrisy. The carefully curated world of the Thorne family was fracturing, then crumbling into dust. I watched it all from my small room at the garden, the scent of damp earth and new beginnings all around me. I felt not triumph, but a quiet, profound sense of rightness. The truth, like a persistent vine, had finally found its way to the light. And there was one last thing left to do. The root of it all. The house on Sycamore Lane. It was a crisp Tuesday in autumn when I saw the sign. The leaves on the sycamores had turned a brilliant, fiery gold, a stark contrast to the faded "For Sale" sign hammered into the front lawn. It was a foreclosure listing. Motivated seller, it read in bold, desperate letters. It turned out that when a financial empire built on smoke and mirrors collapses, it collapses completely. The convertible was repossessed. The credit cards were declined. The mortgage payments on the Grand Victorian house on Sycamore Lane stopped. I watched the public notices online, tracking the process with the same detached focus I had once used to track their lies. The house where I had been made to feel like a shadow, where the memory of my own bones breaking was etched into the walls, was now slipping from their grasp. I called Agnes. She listened patiently, as she always did. The next day, she introduced me to a woman named Sarah who ran a local nonprofit called First Foundation, which helped at-risk youth secure housing through grants and community-backed loans. They were looking for candidates with a story, with resilience, with a clear plan for the future. I didn't give them my life story. I sent them a link to the House of Glass. 2 days later, Sarah called me. "Your application has been approved, Alara," she said, her voice warm with emotion. "Your writing, it was the most compelling personal statement I've ever read." A week later, I walked up the cracked flagstone path to the house on Sycamore Lane. I wasn't the trembling 13-year-old girl anymore. I was a woman with a pre-approved mortgage and a clipboard in my hand. I signed the purchase agreement, my name, Alara Vance, flowing from the pen in a steady, sure script. My hand, with its crooked, resilient fingers, didn't even tremble. They didn't know it was me. The bank handled everything. They were just the evicted former owners, a cautionary tale whispered about at the Port Blossom Yacht Club. I waited until closing day. When I arrived, the lawn was a chaotic mess of cardboard boxes and discarded furniture. Celeste was sitting on the porch steps, her face blotchy from crying as she spoke into her phone, likely to one of the few friends she had left. My father was shouting at a mover, his face florid with a rage that had lost all its power and now just seemed pathetic. I walked right past them, the new keys feeling cool and solid in my palm. Celeste looked up, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Alara? What are you doing here?" My father spun around, his jaw slack. He looked older, smaller than I remembered. The illusion of his power was gone, and all that was left was a tired, bitter man. I turned to face them both, the family who had tried to erase me. I didn't feel the need to shout or to gloat. The gentle, reflective peace I had cultivated within myself was my armor and my sword. I offered them a small, calm smile. "I told you I was going to find the sun," I said softly. "I just decided to bring it home." Then I turned, inserted the key into the lock, and stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me, the sound definitive and final. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of my childhood. It was a clean, empty silence, full of possibility. It was mine. They stood on the lawn, stunned into speechlessness, as I closed the door on their chapter of my life. That night, I didn't throw a party. I didn't blast music or dance in the empty rooms. I unpacked one thing, a simple, sturdy writing desk made of reclaimed oak, paid for with the first royalty check from my blog, which was now being published as a book. I placed it in the bay window of the living room, overlooking the garden. And on it, I set 3 objects: my laptop, a single, perfect sunflower from Agnes's garden in a small glass vase, and the X-ray of my broken hand, a reminder not of what was taken from me, but of what I had built with the pieces. I didn't need to destroy them. They had already hollowed themselves out from the inside. 3 weeks later, I hosted my first dinner party. The guests were not family, but they were my family. Agnes was there, her hands clean for once, a bright shawl around her shoulders. Sarah from the Housing Initiative came, along with a few other young people from the program. Friends I had made at the library and the local bookstore. A new tribe, a chosen family, built on kindness and mutual respect. I didn't serve steak or any food meant to prove a point. I made a large, fragrant pot of chicken and vegetable soup, the kind that warms you from the inside out. The air filled with the scent of rosemary and thyme, of fresh bread baking in the oven. It was the meal I had always craved, not for its ingredients, but for the love it represented. As laughter and warm conversation filled the kitchen, the very room where I had been so systematically starved of affection, I stepped into the hallway. I stood before the same ornate, slightly tarnished mirror where my father had once caught my reflection and muttered about my uselessness. I looked at myself. My eyes were clear. My shoulders were straight. I held up my right hand and studied the familiar, crooked landscape of my knuckles. They still ached when it rained. They still didn't bend quite right. But they were the fingers that had tended a garden, that had held books, that had typed the words that bought me my freedom. They weren't broken anymore. They were forged. Reaching up, I traced my own reflection in the cool glass. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel the ghost of a 9-year-old girl's pain. I felt a deep, quiet power. They thought they had broken me into 1,000 pieces. But they didn't realize that from those shards, you can build a mosaic. They thought they were burying a seed. But all they did was plant a forest. When you rebuild your life from the rubble of someone else's cruelty, you don't come back seeking revenge. You come back owning the very ground they tried to bury you under. And every single thing that grows there is yours.